Elizabeth at the Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I have a PhD in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists, and as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have another installment in my 18th century novel project for you, and we will be looking at Elizabeth Inchbald's A Simple Story from 1791. So I will begin with a brief history and summary before moving into the major themes that I noticed and ending with my thoughts on it as a book. Please be aware there will be spoilers, and if you do not want to know the major plot points of A Simple Story, you should not watch this video. Let's jump in. Elizabeth Inchbald was born as Elizabeth Simpson on October 15th, 1753. She died on August 1st, 1821. She was a Roman Catholic, which I think makes her the first Catholic author that we have seen, because though we did have some Irish authors, I think they were all Anglo-Irish, which means they were Protestant. So at the age of 18 in 1772, Elizabeth decided she wanted to become an actress, despite the fact that she had a very bad stutter. However, she still succeeded, and she shortly after that married Joseph Inchbald. They did not have a happy marriage, but luckily he died pretty quickly. He died in 1779. So she turned to writing after her husband's death. Mostly she wrote plays. Probably the best known today is Lover's Vows from 1798, because it is the play performed in Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. However, she did write two novels, A Simple Story and also Nature and Art in 1796. So, A Simple Story, as I said, published in 1791. So we think it was written in two parts. The first part was likely written between 1777 and 1779. The second part was then written sometime between 1780 and 1790, and in that time, Inchbald also revised the first part. It's two very distinct stories that are connected, but they could have been two separate books, to be perfectly frank. We'll talk about that later. So the first half is following Miss Milner. She is a young woman whose father dies and leaves her to the guardianship of his friend, Mr. Dorriforth, who is a Catholic priest. Miss Milner, whose first name we never know, she was not raised Catholic, so she has a lot of faults. She's a bit of a flighty, fashionable young lady. And she falls in love with Dorriforth, who again is a Catholic priest, and they kind of famously can't marry. So they clash a lot, largely because of differences in ideas of morality due to religion, and also due to her wanting to do a lot of fashionable things and flirt with people and go to balls, and him not thinking she should do that. However, a family member of Mr. Dorriforth's dies and leaves him with the title of Lord Elmwood. And because he has been left this title and now needs to, have an heir, the Catholic Church releases him from his vows. So there is still some drama that happens in there before they finally are able to get married. And there ends the first half. The second half picks up as Miss Milner, now Lady Elmwood, is dying. Her and Lord Elmwood have separated. She had an affair while he was away, and he decided he would never see her or their daughter Matilda again. However, as Lady Elmwood is dying, she writes a letter to Lord Elmwood saying that she wants him to take care of her daughter and asks him to do it in the name of her father, Mr. Milner, since they were such good friends. So Lord Elmwood decides, fine, I will take her into one of my estates and she can stay there as long as I never see her. If I see her ever, she's gone immediately. So Matilda is a very obedient, good girl, and she does her best to not be seen by her father when he is there. She also meets his can't remember if it's his nephew but it's a relation, Mr. Rushbrook, who seems to be going to be Lord Elmwood's heir. And Rushbrook falls in love with Matilda, even though, like, Lord Elmwood will not even speak to anybody of Matilda. Like, nobody's allowed to mention her in his presence. So that obviously causes conflict. We also have Lord Margrave, who is a disreputable guy, and he wants to make Matilda his mistress. So we have some drama around that. Eventually, Lord Elmwood does see Matilda. It is entirely his own fault and not hers. She's still banished. But Lord Margrave kidnaps her. There's a whole thing. She's gotten back, and Lord Elmwood eventually reconciles with her. And I don't remember if her and Rushbrook marry at the end or if it's implied they're gonna get married, but that's the end. Everything's okay, yay. So, what are the major themes of this book? So, the most obvious glaring one is right at the end of the novel. It's the moral that Inchbald puts in. Very frequently, 18th century novels of this time period would have like a moral at the end. And she writes, he, Lord Elmwood, has beheld the pernicious effects of an improper education in the destiny which attended the unthinking Miss Milner. On the opposite side, then, what may not be hoped from that school of prudence, though of adversity, in which Matilda was bred? And Mr. Milner, Matilda's grandfather, had better have given his fortune to a distant branch of his family, as Matilda's father once meant to do. So he had bestowed upon his daughter a proper education. So this idea of a proper education. We are told at the very beginning of the book about Miss Milner's education, which is not much. We are told that she had been to a Protestant boarding school from whence she was sent with merely such sentiments of religion as young ladies of fashion mostly imbibe. Her little heart, employed in all the endless pursuits of personal accomplishments, had left her mind without one ornament, except those which nature gave, and even they were not wholly preserved from the ravages made by its rival, art. So, not very complimentary of Miss Milner's Protestant education. Whereas Matilda, we see her education has been formed on sense and reason. And actually, this is just like the sickest burn ever. Lord Margrave is talking to her, and she doesn't want to deal with him. She says, "My lord, I have a book here in my pocket, which I am eager to read. It is an author who speaks sense and reason. Will you pardon the impatience I feel for such company, and permit me to call your carriage?" So being like, yeah, what you're saying, there's no sense and reason. I don't want your company. I'm gonna go read this book of sense and reason. And that is very much what her education has been. However, despite education being like the closing moral of the book, we really do not actually get much about it. Like, we are told that Miss Milner's education is shoddy. We are told that Matilda's is better, but we do not actually see that. So the writer of the introduction in my copy, this Oxford World's Classics edition, who wrote this? This is J.M.S. Tompkins. So they say, in an era that demanded a suitable moral lesson from its fiction, Inchbald was careful to provide one. That women should have a proper education is her empathetic conclusion, placing a simple story within the main current of 18th century thought. However, they also note that it's an insistent but unintegrated moral tag because we don't actually see much about their educations. And that the main theme is more about female desire. And because of the time period, in order to depict this, Inchbald has to show it as being stifled in the character of Miss Milner, who comes to a rather bad end. So while education is like technically a theme, it's like also kind of not a theme. We also have, in a small amount, another theme that we have seen that carried through these 18th century novels, and that is marriage for love. So Miss Milner is very insistent that she will only marry for love. At one point, Mr. Dorriforth is trying to figure out whether she is in love with this guy, Sir Edward Ashton. And he thinks she should marry him because they have been flirting. And Dorriforth says, "Before your heart is in that state I have described, exert your reason." "I shall," answered she, "and not consent to marry a man whom I could never love." She later on says of another woman, "Miss Fenton may marry from obedience. I never will." "You mean to say love alone shall induce you?" "I do." So of course, Dorriforth is thinking that like her infections are engaged elsewhere. She's in love with him. Like this whole thing, she won't marry anyone else because she is in love with him. So she is able to get that because he is released from his vows to the church. But so it is a very small theme, but we do have that. And because that was such a big theme in Tom Jones, Pamela, Love in Excess, and a few others, I did want to make note of that. However, what I see as the biggest theme of this book is authority and power dynamics between men and women, particularly between in a marriage, but also between father and daughter. So Miss Milner and Dorriforth, like their constant clashing is like over who is going to have the power in this relationship. We are told that by Mr. Milner, "Dorriforth is the only person I know who, uniting every moral virtue of those of religion and native honor to pious faith, will protect without controlling, instruct without tyrannizing, comfort without flattering, and perhaps in time make good by choice rather than by constraint, the dear object of his dying friend's sole care." So he places Miss Milner in Dorriforth's care because he believes that he will be able to protect and instruct her without becoming overly controlling. Unfortunately, he ultimately does become very controlling, particularly in the second half. So we are led to believe, or we are supposed to believe, I should say, that him becoming this kind of tyrant is due to the betrayal by Miss Milner, Lady Elmwood, in between the first and second halves of the book. Inchbald tells us he was no longer the considerate, the forbearing character he formerly was, but haughty, impatient, imperious, and more than ever, implacable. We are also told that Lord Elmwood's will was a law all around. So like in the second half, he is this super dominating kind of tyrannical figure. And he's like not supposed to be in the first half, I guess, but he also kind of is, because him and Miss Milner are just constantly trying to subjugate each other. And like sometimes they will bend to each other and then other times they won't. So at one point, rather early on, before he knows that she's in love with him and all of this, she says to him, "You knelt to me last night, I now kneel to you. Kneel, never desiring to rise more. If you persist in your intention, I am weak, I am volatile, I am indiscreet, but I have a heart from whence some impressions can never be erased." So like, sometimes they'll submit to each other, but then they go back on it, because once her and Dorriforth are engaged, Miss Milner says, "Are not my charms even more invincible than I ever believed them to be? Doriforth, the grave, the sanctified, the anchorite, Doriforth, by their force is animated to all the ardor of the most impassioned lover, while the proud priest, the austere guardian, is humbled, if I but frown, into the veriest slave of love." At another point, she says, "Let my Lord Elmwood act just as his love shall dictate, and now I have no longer a doubt of its excess. Instead of stooping to him, I wait in the certain expectation of his submission to me." This, of course, gets her into a ton of trouble. Their engagement is broken off for a while. They do get married, but obviously that doesn't work out well. So at one point, Doriforth's friend it has convinced them to finally get married. And he says to her, "Act but under the dominion of those vows to a husband of sense and virtue like him, and you will be all that I, himself, or even heaven can desire. Now then, Lord Elmwood, this moment give her up forever, or this moment constrain her by such ties from offending you, she shall not dare to violate." So this idea that the husband has so much power over the wife. She obviously does violate them, but she very much regrets it. On her deathbed, we are told that her ladyship, long before her decease, had declared it was not her intention to leave a single sentence behind her in the form of a will. She had no will, she said, but what she would wholly submit to Lord Elmwood's. And if it were even his will, her child should live in poverty, as well as banishment, it should be so. But perhaps in this implicit submission to his lordship, there was a distant hope that the necessitous situation of his daughter might plead more forcibly than his parental love. And that knowing her abandoned of every support but through himself, that idea might form some little tie between them and be at least a token of the relationship. So on her death, Lady Elmwood's like, Lady Elmwood, Miss Milner, is like, "No, I have no will but my lord's." But even that, it's like an attempt to manipulate him into kind of doing what she wants. So Matilda is everything that her mother is not. She submits immediately to her father. In his, I guess, compromise for providing for Matilda, he says, "One neglect of my commands releases my promise totally. If she obeys me in this," never coming into his presence, "I certainly provide for her as my daughter during my life and leave her a fortune at my death. But if she dares," so this idea that if he sees her, we're going back on all that. And Matilda submits easily. Her friend Miss Woodley says, "And you know you promised your mother, whatever your fate was, to submit with patience." "Yes," replied Matilda, "and I am prepared for everything but my father's refusal to my dear mother." So she thinks that he's not going to grant her request, but Lady Elmwood's dying request, but he does. And she is very regretful when she does break the command, which he was not supposed to be there. He had gone to like their hunting lodge or whatever the heck. And she was like, "Oh, I can walk freely around the grounds." He returned unannounced to anyone. And then they happen upon each other out in the garden. So it's like, dude, this is your own fault. But she's completely like blaming herself. She's like, "I know I had but one command from my father and that I have disobeyed." So she is this perfect obedient woman. So it very much seems like Inchbald is going along with this idea of the disobedient woman gets punished, whereas the obedient one is rewarded. We have our very obedient Matilda in contrast with our unobedient Miss Milner, Lady Elmwood, who dies. But then we have the character of Rushbrook, who is in love with Matilda. And it's fascinating because he submits to Matilda instead of having Matilda submit to him. So he wants to see her more often, and she is opposed to this. She says, Unless indeed Lord Elmwood should delegate to you control of me, his commands I never dispute. And he says, I will not offend you, madam, by staying one moment longer, and I give my honor that upon no pretense whatever will I presume to intrude here again. Professions, I find, have no weight, and only by this obedience to your orders can I give a proof of that respect which you inspire. So he is willing to submit to her orders to show how much he respects and admires her. We are kind of seeing a similar idea to Charlotte Lennox's The Female Quixote, in which this idea of the man submitting to the woman was or the woman submitting to the man was a very important one. Rushbrook is very, aware of perceiving to have authority over Matilda. He does not want to do that. An invitation for her company on his part, so him asking her to come see him, might carry the appearance of superior authority and an affected condescension, which he justly considered as the worst of all insults. And she notes that he did not look as if he thought himself our superior. And he once again submits to her, instruct me what I am to do to show my esteem and respect, rather than permit me thus unguided to rush upon what you may misterm cruelty or arrogance. And he does this through their whole relationship. He is always submitting to her. Now, we also have his contrast in Lord Margrave, who pretends to submit to her, but only for his own reasons. So Lord Elmwood's friend, Mr. Sandford, is telling him, don't come again because your visits might be displeasing to Lord Elmwood. In the next place, I know they are so to his daughter. So his lordship nevertheless submitted with patience, but in his own mind determined how long this patience should continue. No longer than it served as the means to prove his obedience, and by that artifice secure his better reception at some future period. So he's only submitting, he's falsely submitting. He's I'll make it appear as if I'm submitting so that I can then get in with her later. So again, very similar to some things that we saw in The Female Quixote. So I do see this power dynamics between men and women as the biggest theme. And it does end with the man in the marriage submitting to the woman. Although we do, of course, have the woman submitting to her father. So, So what did I think of this as a book? I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I do feel like it could have been two separate books. I said that earlier. But the stories of Miss Milner and Matilda feel very distinct. And the characters that are in both parts really felt like they didn't need to be the same characters. They acted in the same way, some of them, but it easily could have been two separate stories instead of one. I really would have liked to have seen some of the stuff that happens in the interim between the two parts. So Miss Milner, Lady Elmwood's actual affair, we are told of it, but maybe seeing some of that would make this feel a little more coherent as a book, because they do feel really distinct. I'm there was really no reason for these to be one story. It just we had to have a 15-year time jump. I don't know. I still really enjoyed it. I particularly liked the first half a lot because I liked Miss Milner. She was a very interesting heroine. Matilda, less so. She's kind of, Miss Milner's rebellious, she's flirtatious, she's fun. Matilda's just okay, I'll sit here and I'll be here acting invisible because my father said so, which is it's kind of boring. So yeah, the first half I definitely preferred And I do feel like more of the drama happens in the first half. Like, there is drama in the second half, particularly with Lord Margrave, but the more interesting drama to me was in the first half. So I gave this 4 stars. Like I said, I liked it a lot. Really could have been 2 books. So that was A Simple Story by Elizabeth Inchbald. Next, for November, we will be looking at The Italian by Anne Radcliffe from 1797, I believe. Let me know down in the comments, have you read A Simple Story? What did you think of it? Did you agree with me? Disagree with me? What are some themes you noticed in it? If you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.